Last week, we heard about General George Patton and the museum on the leadership at Fort Knox. We will continue this theme with today's keynote speaker, retired Rear Admiral Ben Wachendorf, a friend, colleague, and executive advisor at SMA. As a naval officer, Ben served as the Chief of Staff for the Joint Forces Command, the U.S. Defense Attaché in Moscow, and Director of U.S. Navy Strategy and Policy. And I think, Ben was the role model for the captain of the submarine Dallas in the movie Hunt for Red October. Let's turn the camera over to Ben, who will talk about the effective leaders he has grown to know over the years, and he will discuss lessons learned from the war in Ukraine, and then review defense priorities, and finally share stories from his time at sea. If you have any questions for Ben, please put them into the chat. Over to you, Ben.
Hey, Jack, thanks a lot. Nice to spend some time with you all again. I've been here before, and I'll try not to repeat myself and stay within some time constraints. But I thought I'd start off, like Jock said, maybe talking about 4 individuals I had the pleasure of working with and certainly respected as leaders, but more importantly for all of us, what I felt distinguished them as being very effective. The first is one many people know, Admiral Hyman Rickover, commonly called the father of the Navy nuclear power program. I guess, in my opinion, since maybe Thomas Edison, nobody has ever done more in a field of technology with fewer resources as an individual than Rickover did, because he certainly was directly responsible for an enormously successful program. I won't dwell on that, but he was there for a very long time. One of the reasons he was very effective is he didn't really answer to anybody in uniform, or for that matter, even the White House until the very end. He had great support in Congress, and he nurtured that. And he ruled his empire of all nuclear power, which certainly includes the nuclear powered aircraft carriers, attack and missile submarines, and for a while we had nuclear cruisers. And he did it very efficiently. He had a very lean management system. He probably had 30 direct reports. And many of you on this call know more about industry than I do, but I think that's a high ratio. And basically no deputy. He was a workaholic and, as I said, a great man. But like all of us, he had some faults. He ended up terminating his active duty career when he was on the sea trials of USS La Jolla, which was a Los Angeles class 688 nuclear submarine. And they were testing a backing belt. The ship had not been delivered to the Navy and was still owned by the contractor, but he was on board, as he always rides the first sea trials of every nuclear powered ship. They answered a backing bell and they started to get a temperature alarm on a bearing. And he wanted to see how high it was going to go, because if it broke, the shipyard had to fix it. Problem was the ship was submerged, and driving a submarine backwards is not a normal act, and the crew is inexperienced, and the ship took a severe angle, and they almost lost the ship with all hands. It took the prospective commanding officer going from what they call the control room back to the maneuvering room to physically pull Rickover out of the engineering control station, because the lieutenant that was on watch had a 4-star admiral tell him to do something and it wasn't listening to the captain. Well, the captain saved the ship. Analysis of that incident showed the ship was within 5 seconds of flipping over upside down and would have lost the ship. Just point that out as not a commonly known fact. Another great leader that you may have heard of is Jim Mattis. He was my boss at Joint Forces Command, as Jock said, for 2 years. He went on from there to be the commander of Central Command. He was also the Secretary of Defense. He was an amazing leader, the finest military guy I've ever worked for, and widely respected within the Marine Corps. Things that he would do to help reach out to people is when he was the commanding general at the big base in North Carolina, he'd get in civilian clothes in a car that didn't have any military decals on it and look for Marines that were hitching rides or trying to go someplace and give them a ride and then ask them how things were going. uh, and they didn't know who he was. And he'd get a lot of intel right from the ground level that way, use it very effectively. He was a very clear communicator, very concise. He was also a very hardworking guy. In the war in Iraq, he was the three-star senior Marine commander of combat forces on one side of the river. The Army had the other side, and they're marching towards Baghdad. He relieved a brigade commander, Marines call them regiments, but a senior 06 command in combat with the enemy. We've had many military commanders in the Army and Marines being relieved in wartime, but never when they were in actual fight with the enemy. But he did. So goes to show you he's pretty decisive. Another fellow that is admirable that I had a positive relationship with is Robert Gates. He served both Democratic and Republican presidents. He first served under President Bush and was asked to stay on by President Obama. He served as the director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense. The thing I admired most about him is that no matter what the crisis, and there were many of them, he never lost his cool, kept very calm and collective, very objective. And whenever he made a decision, he would repeat why he made that decision, knowing that there were people in the room that disagreed with it. And he invited that, by the way, and gave one more chance for anybody to say, is there anything else I'm missing here? And very, very effective, great leader. Final guy that I'll talk about is Bill Burns. He's currently the director of the CIA. He was my ambassador in Moscow when I was the defense attaché. He left there and went on to work his way up the State Department chain of command. And as I said, is now the director of CIA. When I get to lessons learned on Ukraine, he'll lead off there. But he, again, shares a lot with Bob Gates about being unflappable. I've never seen him raise his voice in some pretty intense discussions. And again, very crystal clear to his people, always wanted to hear dissenting views. So there we go. I saw a question, does every embassy have a defense attaché? Generally speaking, yes. We only put general or admiral officers in two. One is in Moscow and one is in Beijing. The others are normally by 05s or 06s, and the size of the staff varies. Certainly if it's a NATO country or something like that, there's a bigger defense office, but there's almost always some kind of defense thing, because if there's a military overflight of that country, or there's any foreign arms sales, or if there's any exchange of officers for training, those things all get covered by defense attachés, and they report to the ambassador in that capacity. That's the leadership issues I was going to discuss, and trying to stay on track here. I thought I'd briefly talk about some lessons learned out of Ukraine, and then pause for any questions that people might have. I'd say the number one lesson is the importance of alliances. And I don't want to get into the weeds of politics, and I don't have an agenda to sell here, but it's no secret that NATO was not in very good shape prior to the invasion of Ukraine. It's in much better shape now, and in fact larger by one country working on Sweden to make it a new addition after Finland. Before the war started, and this is another lesson learned, is the value of intelligence, and that's at two levels, strategic and tactical. At the strategic level, the aforementioned director of CIA traveled to Moscow 2 months, about 7 weeks before the actual invasion, And we made a decision at the very highest level to share with our adversary and allies information that we normally don't share. It's called communications intelligence. And that's all I'll say about it, because I still pass lie detector tests and do some consulting work for director as it is now, and I don't want to screw up. The point I'm trying to make here is that information is normally very closely held. And this was shared with the Russians. We said, hey, we know what you're going to do. We know what your orders that you've given your military, and don't do this, because if you do, these things are going to happen. We also shared that with our allies. Poland picked right up on that. Others didn't want to believe it. But of course, it came down, as we all know. But that was unprecedented sharing of strategic intelligence, and I think it had a very positive effect, primarily for the evacuees, because Poland was readily able to, many NATO countries have taken evacuees, but none more than Poland. And because of that warning, they were able to take evacuees from Ukraine much faster. And a lot of lives were saved in that effort. I'd say the second lesson learned is the value of unmanned platforms. Sometimes those are being looked at in some militaries as just a labor-saving device or a force multiplier, but they're very effective. And we've seen that in many examples in Ukraine. I would go on to say that perhaps the next most important lesson learned is the value of boots on the ground combined with logistics support. The munitions consumption rates in Ukraine are very high, particularly for artillery systems and some missiles. So the depth of which we have resupplied those inventories is very important. And related to the boots on the ground, there tends to be, in my experience, and we're all products of our perspective. I should have said before, I've got 8 years of my life, day for day, spent underwater, so consider the source there. But the value, in my opinion, of air power is overrated. The Russian Air Force in particular has not been effective, does not have air supremacy, despite almost a 10-to-1 advantage in numbers over Ukraine because of their effective air defense systems, including those supplied by the United States. We also, I think, overvalue some of the armor systems. The Russian armor, partly because of its design, but also just their numbers. They outnumbered Ukrainian forces by over 10-to-1. And they were stopped cold coming into Kiev and had to retreat. And there's intense fighting going on right now involving those vehicles, but it's the boot on the ground, the soldier that controls the turf, that is the most important military asset. And of course, the spirit and determination of the Ukrainians fighting to defend their country is speaks for itself, I think. I've probably said enough here, and I'm just about up on my time limit, and I've covered a lot of ground, but I can always talk sea stories, but would there be any questions that anybody would like me to try to answer before we do that?
I think you have one on the embassy there, Ben.
I saw the embassy, and I think I answered that. Somebody asked about shipping a system, an anti-tank system. I am not familiar with that. I cannot say. Mm-hmm. There are many anti-tank systems, and in the Gulf War scenarios, it tended to be armor on armor, or U.S. air power on armor, and we won all of those fights. In the Ukraine example, individual infantry, very small units, are using man-portable anti-armor systems like Javelin and others very effectively. Okay, well,
so Ben,
if
Ben, I
something else
think
comes,
that there, yeah, I think there's been a request for a sea story if you have one.
sure. I've talked before. I think, and I know people don't always attend the same town hall. I've discussed being hit by a broom by the current King of England in a past time, I could repeat that, but maybe rather than that, let's see. I think I've also discussed an unsolicited cold call to Hugh Hefner of the Playboy organization right before my ship left for 5 months. Did I discuss that one?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about that? So the year was 1993. I was in command of the most highly decorated ship in the history of the Navy. We were going out for 5 months. No mail, no internet, no fresh food. And we had 69 people sharing a bunk. We put three sailors into two bunks, and that's what we call hot bunking. And that bunk was just a plywood board with a foam pad and some a sleeping bag of their own. And they shared that because we didn't have enough room. And to make a long story short, it was a very successful mission, and we got a presidential unit citation, the highest award that anybody can get. You brief the president of the United States one-on-one in the Oval Office and all of that. But the interesting part of this is, as I mentioned, we didn't have any internet and there was no mail coming or going, but they did have what they called family grams. A family gram was a 40-word telegram that was paid for by the United States Navy that a family could send once a month. So we were gone 5 months, you get 5 family grams, and they could be sent whenever they wanted. There are very specific rules about what you could put in a family gram. Certainly no obscenities or anything like that. But because you do have deaths in the family and other kinds of tragedies, by regulation, the CO had to read every family gram before it was delivered. And when the sailor who gets it got off watch, it'd be folded up and put on his pillow. And it's a nice thing to do. You never knew when they were coming. We had 200 guys on that submarine, a record still today. And so that meant about 50 family grams a week would be coming in. And everybody got it like that manner I said, except for one guy. Once a week, the radioman would pick the family gram of the week contest. And for that one, he didn't get it. Instead, there was a grease board, a plastic piece outside the crew's mess that they wrote on grease pencil with 40 blanks on it. And every watch, they put in a few words and leave off the name until the end. And everybody got to read that family gram. Well, we had a new sailor come in, and I right out of the Great Lakes and submarine school training thing. And he came on board within about 3 days before we left. And the first thing a sailor does is tends to be a helping the galley, washing dishes and that kind of stuff. This guy happened to be in a machinist mate, but everybody works in the galley, and that's a good first job for a sailor, getting settled in. And while he was doing that, he was giving his family grams away. There's all serialized. And the chief of the boat, the senior enlisted guy, came right to me and said, "Captain, we got a big problem. We got a new sailor we got. He's giving his family grams away. He doesn't know anybody, and he has nobody to write to him." Oh, geez, what to do about this? Well, his mother had some problems with the law, and he was brand new, and he just didn't have anybody, no relatives or anybody to send him. So I wrote an unsolicited letter to Mr. Hefner describing that we were about to go, and he wouldn't have time to get back to me by the time he got my letter. But I gave him 5 extra family grams and said, "Hey, would you maybe know somebody, this kid's from California, who could send him some nice words, and here's all the rules, by the way, what you can and can't say in a family gram." And so away we went. Well, we weren't out but more than a month, and he got a family gram and won the family gram of the week contest. And because he didn't get it until it was signed up on the board, he was stunned. He said, he didn't know what to do. So he went to the chief of the boat and he said, "Well, you better go talk to the captain." So I told him what I did, and it was from Mr. Hefner's organization. And so he said, "Well, what should I do?" I said, "Well, and oh, by the way, everybody on that ship had a top secret clearance and had to pass polygraph exams." And he said, "I don't want to screw up my security clearance." I said, "Well, we have a social tack thing, sort of like asking Does that dress make me look fat or some other kind of thing? There's no wrong answer. You just say, yeah, she was somebody you went to high school with, or somebody you knew in the past, and that's okay. Well, he won the Family Gram of the Week contest with 3 out of his 5 family grams, all from different girls. The guy was a hero. I mean, and it's only after we got back that he told that story. So that's a sea story. And I think I'm about out of time.
But before you go, Ben, it's okay because I think that this has been wildly interesting. So I think there's a couple of questions in the chat, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. One is, are you able to share the name of submarine you photographed? Yeah, it's Parche, P-A-R-C-H-E. It was named after a fish. We used to name submarines out of fish all the time. Now it's politicians, cities, and states. But the first USS Parche was a diesel submarine in World War II. And the CO of that was a guy named Ramage. He won the Medal of Honor. And that tradition was carried on.
Excellent.
I am a submarine guy too, right? I was in the Navy 38 years, and as I mentioned, spent 8 years day for day underwater.
I meant that for Rob Walker, who asked one of the questions.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Any other questions?
Any comments on how bad the Russian leadership has been during the current conflict, Ben?
Yeah, that's a big vulnerability. I should say up front that, and we've known this for a long time, some people were surprised at the bad performance of the Russian military, but those in the know weren't, because they have what we call non-commissioned officers. If you go to any Air Force or Army or especially Marines or Navy unit, you'll find they call them different things, but non-commissioned officers, senior enlisted, are so talented. They are so smart. They are so effective. They do very complex things. And in the Russian military, which is a conscript force, they have what they call warrant officers, which are sort of like they're special in between officer and enlisted, and all they know is threats and intimidation. Their leadership is extremely poor, and they have a lot of challenges that way. So the leadership at the unit level, tactical level, is very poor. Sadly, I think it's reflected in some of the war crime accusations. As we've all read, they're taking criminals and giving them a chance to get out of jail to go join their army without any training. That's a recipe for disaster, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, Ben, I think there was a request that to share, if you wouldn't mind, sharing some of the things behind you on your credenza there.
Oh, sure. Well, let's see. That's okay. Let's bring this one up front. That's a model of the Parche. It was cut in half and made 100 feet longer. This says that I was the commanding officer of it for 6 years, which is also a Navy record. This is a piece of the pressure hull. That's the thickness of the steel that's circular in shape that keeps water out of the people tank. And that's one of the links of the anchor that held us together.
It's very cool.
Let's see. This is an interesting piece. I might have shown this before. This is a picture of me with the commander of the Russian Pacific Fleet, taken in their newest Akula, which is a new nuclear attack submarine. And it's a vodka bottle, empty now. It was given to me because when I was defense attaché, the Russians had a mini sub called AS-28 with 7 sailors on board that got trapped, hung up. It's a battery powered little robot sub that was hung up in some fishing nets, and they couldn't get up. And to make a long story short, we rescued them with about 8 hours of air left after about 7 days. Very close call, and they all survived. We worked with the British in that, and they were very thankful. So they gave me a tour of their newest submarine and this bottle of vodka. The other interesting piece of that is this 4-star admiral right there. When I did that mission on Parchi that I was talking about before, he was the commander of the Russian Northern Fleet Submarine Force. That's their largest fleet. And during that mission, Russian armored vehicles fired on the Russian White House, which is not like our White House. That's their like Capitol building. It was sort of like January 6th on steroids with automatic weapons, and a lot of unrest. So it was a difficult time in Russia. But we had a communications vulnerability that we didn't know about, an operational security thing. And my ship would have never been sent on that mission if we had known about it. But in fact, we later learned about it, and this admiral knew about it. And he said, when you were up there on your last mission, we had 26 anti-submarine warfare units out looking for you. And I said, oh, well, I'm not going to ever admit, confirm, or deny that I was ever there. But if you had detected and he also said, and we had a very unusual order to remove all the safety devices on our ASW weapons. And that got my attention. So I said, I'm not going to confirm or deny that I was ever there, but if you had detected a foreign submarine, did you have permission to launch those weapons? He said, no, we had to call Moscow before firing, but that wouldn't have taken long.
That's awesome, Ben.
Yeah, enough of that.
Well, hey, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your interesting insights and leadership and the state of affairs, and of course your sea stories, and telling us a little bit, sharing a little bit about some of the artifacts you've collected over time.
Sure.
You know, you may not know, but I had an opportunity to brief Gates on the effectivity of performance measurement for major programs about 2007 timeframe. And you know, as always, your presentations are not only captivating, but we'd love to get you back. You're always a big favorite